in Buddhism they talk about contact, which is like the mind coming into contact with an object.
Yeah.
But I don't understand how contact could be a thing. Like, why is there contact between things if they're all the same thing? It's basically contact is not real.
The mind has its own special relationship with phenomena, with objects. The mind can... You see, the thing with the mind is it makes contact with all other objects by becoming it, but it's how it becomes it. You become your environment by your thought of it. So I would say to you, you're sitting on a chair. It's a chair because your mind has become the thing, hasn't it? It's become the thought. Without that thought, what is that chair? So the mind is a reference to the world. It belongs to the world. It serves the world. It becomes the world by the thought of it. This is why you have many thoughts. Whatever you look at, first of all, your mind has become that thing by becoming a thought of it. So the mind makes contact with everything and it grows. But the mind cannot be a thought of your essential nature. But it tries. The mind is a thought-making machine. Your thought of something then becomes the word. I know that's I know this is a table. There's the thought, table. Not only a thought, but there's a word. Table, the word table. The mind has become the thing. But if you live by that, if you become that contracted thing in the mind that names everything, labels everything, to the point where even labels you, so you become I. But that I is just another thought. It's a thought of you. If you live by that, that is living by judgment. The wages of which are death, because it's an unconscious process. It's not truly experiencing you. It's not experiencing you. It's not alive. It's not real. That's why they use the word death. The mind, look how our mind becomes things. Play around with it. Look around. Everything, you know everything. Room, space. The mind has become it by being the thought of it. And then you hear in the Tao Te Ching, whatever it's called, the Tao, whatever, that the thought is not it. The word is not it. So what we're saying is the mind cannot claim the experience of your essential nature. The mind cannot, it can create a thought, it can say, I'm into true nature. And you can have many thoughts made up of a life, schemas of a life, spiritual life. And the mind is what becomes the spiritual life via schema, thought. But that is the function of the mind, is it not the function? If we didn't have a mind, we'd be here without a thought or word for where we are. How would you know what to do? How would you know to sit down? That's a schema. You've developed a thought, sit down. It's a thought. You've replicated it. The mind has become that. Do you see how the mind has become the world? The mind is the world. Can you see that? But can the world produce a thought that contacts your essential nature? No. For the thought is not it. The word is not it. I find it quite phenomenal how we go from not seeing something. And have you ever been somewhere and you've seen a shape in the trees or somewhere and you don't know what it is? You've seen something, you don't know what it is. Or an animal, like if you go into a jungle and you see an animal walking and you don't know what it is, it's actually frightening, isn't it? It's actually frightening because you don't know it. You've not contacted that. You haven't contacted that animal to know what it is. Is it dangerous? Does it eat humans or does it just eat vegetable, right? You don't know this stuff. You've never seen one. You've never seen the shape of it. So part of it is our survival. Part of it is like when you see a snake, if you didn't have the thought snake, if the mind had not become the snake, you'd get killed. So the mind becomes the mind is the world. Our contact with the world is via our mind. It's a thought of the thing and then the word, and we communicate in that way. When you go to Greece and you come back and you talk about your holiday, you're giving me your thoughts. You're giving me how the mind has become your experience. And with those thoughts, you're sharing them with an energetic stamp, essential stamp of it was really good or wasn't that great. The mind has become that. That's the function of the mind. It does it whether you want to do it or not.
So would you say that contact is created because of the mind?
Yeah.
Or it's just mind contacting mind. It's like the thought for myself contacting the thought for something else. The thought for something else.
Yeah. Well, what's happened is the mind in self-reflection, when you look in the mirror, there's a body and there's self-awareness looking. You've developed a thought and you've gone, I. And then from that sense of I, thought, contracted in the mind, you believe you're naming all of these things, but you're doing it. That's the illusion. You believe you're doing it. You believe you're the experience of it. That's the illusion. Is that thought I? It's become a thought of you when you stood in front of the mirror. It's a thought that was created when someone said, your name is Chris, you're a boy, you must do well. If you don't do well, I'll negatively or positively use reinforcement.
Is there a deeper level to that?
Yes.
Because if before the thought, it's still there's the perception, like a perception, isn't there? Like an appearance. It's still an appearance, isn't it?
There's always appearance.
Yeah.
This appearance is God's idea. The world is just God's idea, God's creation. And you think it, you match it with your thoughts. You're walking around it, becoming it by your mind. And also there's the unconscious forces occurring in your body as well. The instincts, the downloaded information from genetics and from ancestral. And you're matching all of it with thought. That's the mind contacts everything. The mind is the contact point to this world. It's the vehicle in which we land on this planet. It's the vehicle by which we observe, we experience this planet. But it can't turn in on itself. And you know, whatever thought you have for the essential nature, it is not that. It's just like your thought for the chair is not a chair, but it's your contact point with the chair. Otherwise, you'd have no relationship with that chair in a relative sense. But in an absolute sense, it's a different story. That's the mind.
What's happening in the absolute sense? Nothing.
Transcendence. 3 levels of transcendence, 3 levels of experience, 3 levels of understanding, 3 types of knowledge. Knowing is a trinity that fits within the mind, like a glove. It's like your knowing is in the glove, but one of the fingers is pointing at the mind's contraction, saying, yeah, but that's who I am, and I've got all these thoughts. So that's that suffering is that you're caught up in all these thoughts of everything, because you know that your thoughts is not the thing. So it's not substantial, is it, in terms of meaning? You get bored. How often do you get bored when you read something and you think, this is so fantastic? And then the thoughts wane afterward. I read too much, or I understand it now. Yeah? You get bored. Thoughts are boring. They call it habituation. It's like something at first is good, but that initial experience, after a while, you need to start using more to get that initial experience. That's habituation. It happens with drugs. Heroin, fantastic, but then after a while you start developing a habit. You start needing more to get that initial experience, and most of the time you don't even get that initial experience. You're just chasing something you never get, right? That's habituation. In absolute truth, there's no habituation. It's goodness. It's okay. It's always enough. And knowing has knowledge. Knowing has the knowledge, but your mind is gathering information. Your mind is scouting information. You're scouting. That's what the mind is. It's a scout. You send it out. It lands on this planet. You start a recce, right? You go reconnaissance. We call that education. We call that growing up. Okay. This is milk. This is food. This is your name. You start developing thoughts for everything. And the mind is a scout, right? And then after, as you become adults, you realize there must be something more meaningful than this. There must be something more meaningful than my own perception of this world. My own perception of this world is just a thought of this world in variable form, what we call diversity. I have a thought for everything. We educate our thinking, we educate our thought structures, we become more refined. But we get bored ultimately. Not all of us, but some of us begin to realize that The snapshot that we take of this world is just a thought, and that thought lives in relation to memory. So that thought cannot transcend memory. It cannot find God. If the cause and condition of thought is memory, then isn't that an unconscious thing? The mind, is it not unconscious? Of course it is. It's subconscious. Of course, the mind doesn't experience itself. What is it that, to take it deeper, to take it into a place where we fully understand the function of the mind, is to ask yourself, the illusion of the thought for yourself, thinking these thoughts for everything, is that truly experiencing itself? Or is not the experience your knowing? Ask yourself this question. All of you, ask that question. Answer that question. Is the experience of your own reconnaissance? Is it by your own acquired knowledge, where you've become this world by your thought of it? Is that truly what is experiencing you now? Or is there a deeper experience of gnosis? Is there knowing? It's like when you look at me, awareness can meet awareness, and we can have that expansion, that connection, that merging. And suddenly there's no reconnaissance. But if you don't have that awareness, it's just reconnaissance. You're just looking at me, some jumped up kid from the ghetto or something, who, I don't know, whatever thoughts you may have. Is your experience of me by your thoughts of me? Or do you actually meet me? Do you merge with what you are, what I am, not seeing the other as other? There's no reconnaissance. There's no content in gnosis. But reconnaissance is occurring all the time. Mental activity is not something you're doing, it's just happening. But the illusion is that we think we're doing it. Which then gives the illusion that the mind experiences itself. This is such an illusion. Can you not see that? Can you see that? What is the deepest reality in you? It's not the mind. But the mind is something we get stuck on. It's like going around, our finger is glued to the camera button. You can't stop doing that. Can't stop. Until one day you just stop. Yeah, I know that's a person. Yeah, I know that's a chair. Yeah, that's all just happening. That's fine. My mind does that. My mind becomes the thing. My mind is the contact. My mind is the vehicle. And it's reconnaissance. All that is the activity of a true mind, is reconnaissance. And in that reconnaissance, it's all self-evident of your knowing appearing, is your knowing merging. This becomes a vehicle that is reflective of gnosis only as the experience, not the mind. So in that sense, we just have this vehicle. That is what it is. Whatever thought you have for anything is mind. Seeking included. Okay, it's on silent. The important thing is, when you understand the nature of the mind, what it does is reconnaissance. it cannot turn around. It cannot. Become what you are. The knowing is formless. It's a fractal. Have you seen how addictive it is, the mind? Have you seen how you can get caught up in knowing things, and when you're with someone else and they know something, and that again, that tension, that the contraction of self, it's incredible.
The mind is the mind is the thing that's happening. Thoughts are.
Yeah, and it's like the fact that we can call something is evidence of a thought. Every word you speak is a thought. Probably obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me that everything I say comes from how the mind has become the thing as a thought first. Now, I don't know about you, but I found that phenomenally fascinating. Because I know that we're just not our thoughts. So what we say is not the thing. It's not the thing.
Yeah, thoughts are not knowing. Our thoughts are not our knowing.
But they are self-evident of knowing. The thought is the mind becoming the external world. It can also take snapshots of the internal world of what we call body mind. And the mistake we make is that we call that inner. That subjective experience, we then go, oh, then the within is in the body, because the mind can get a thought, an impression of something in here, and go, yeah, it's got something coming up, and yeah, the word got something coming up. They're words, aren't they? Oh yeah, I've got something coming up, and it's causing me to think this and to feel that. Oh wow. And there's this internal world, but it's not. That's all objects that appear within your gnosis. The true innermost is knowing. See, when you get caught up in the mind, you then get caught up in the body, and you call the body the innermost. You go within the body, and it's absolutely not true. Knowing is the truth. Knowing has a transcendent truth in that it knows that the mind, whatever snapshot it takes, whatever word it speaks, whatever information it's gathered, does not qualify the knowing, does not add meaning to the knowing. The knowing is meaning, indifferent to anything that you say, anything you think. But what knowing knows is this: it is the root source of what it sees. Nothing is separate from your knowing. But you may be too busy, caught up in your thoughts and your collection of thoughts, experiencing from thoughts and speaking this language, caught up in cult. And you're missing the depth of what you really know. You're caught up in your acquired imagery and thinking, speaking.
Reconnaissance, as you called it.
Yes, caught up in reconnaissance. Scouting. And you're scouting for yourself, being an idea, believing it's experiencing all of these other thoughts, when in fact you should be scouting for no one. It should be given to your being. It should be given to your knowing. Everything. Every thought that arises should be given to your knowing. What is the truth of every thought you have ever think? Is the knowing of it, not the thought itself that becomes the word. That's where people get stuck, the thought and the word. You're too busy thinking and speaking. to know, instead to know nothing, and to know that this nothingness is the very innermost of all things that appear. And that is a truth. The truth is, I'm knowing of the mind. The mind does not experience itself. The experience of mind is given to gnosis. Everything you experience is because you know it, not because you think it. It's because you know it. Don't give it to the thinker, give it to your knowing. Everything that's happening now is because you know it. Your mind is taking pictures all the time, and from that you can speak words, so we can communicate on a relative level. We've landed here. The mind is the vehicle. What steps out of the vehicle is gnosis. What's behind the vehicle or within the vehicle is gnosis. And it doesn't see the vehicle as other than gnosis being the experience. Now we're starting to go deeper into the rabbit hole. Everything's the beloved. Even every thought, every word you speak is the beloved. How can it not be? How can anything be separate from your knowing? Is this not a game we play with ourselves to pretend we don't know and instead we think what we think? How can that be true?
Is our true nature not only seeing and loving itself ceaselessly, but also seeing and loving all of its creations, all of our minds?
Yeah, it happens naturally when you begin to abide behind the scenes, so to speak, when that knowing does awaken and begins to see that nothing is separate from knowing. So whatever you're seeing, whatever you're knowing, is in relation to your knowing being the reality principle, right? So you love that. You love knowing. Once knowing is established, once knowing is revealed, when it's distinguished from your contracted personal sense of self, claiming all the experience of all your thoughts, your reconnaissant mind, this one thought that can you? It's like a little baby riding the bull, This I thought that's believing it. The experience of the mind, the mind experience itself. So you come to love that. You come to find rest. It's love, and you see in that there's a true love of self. There's love for self there, and you love yourself. And there's nothing personal about it. There's nothing mental about it. There's nothing phony about it, because we can all get phony and start, practicing self-love and self-nurture, and we can do that through the mind's inference, can't we? We can do that with thoughts, with words, with, and it's quite phony sometimes. If people believe that that's the only truth, to nurture love and all of that stuff, it's not a crime. I mean, we all have to start somewhere. But then when awakening occurs, when knowing awakens and sees that all experience is this knowing, you come to see that there is this positive self-regard that's natural. It's an absolute truth that this knowing is love. And you can't help but love when you're love, when you're this prior all contraction body of reality, transcendent root source of all your thoughts. Suddenly everything's coming back in relationship to what's truly experiencing. And there's love, self-love. It's like, I love myself now. And then you start to look out into the world and you look at people and you start seeing that people aren't their thoughts either. People aren't their words. And you see beyond that and you see into their deeper nature. Even if they don't see it, you can merge with it. And you don't see their essential nature as other than your essential nature. And you start to merge, you start to feel that oneness. And again, that's love for the world. To love thy neighbor as thyself is the second commandment. And the first commandment is to love thy God with all thy heart. So that's to know as consciousness, to fully concede to the innermost and see there's an absolute truth in one's essential nature. And that's God, right? That's your relationship with the divine, the very innermost of awareness, that essence, that unknowable, that place where the mind can't come in and do a reconnaissance. It cannot come in and do photographs. Okay, so there's this love. So the first commandment is to love thy God with all thy heart. And there we have it, that's self-realization. And to love thy God to love thy neighbor as thyself is to see God in all things. And you see God especially in people, more than anything. In people especially. You can see God in mountains and splendor and all these, but when you meet someone, it's a direct God connection. When you see beyond the mind and you're merging with consciousness itself, knowing that consciousness in its innermost is God, you suddenly see that to love thyself, to love thy neighbor as thyself, because when consciousness goes within itself, it comes to see it is the self. And then we start merging with people, and this is true love. This is how we're meant to. This is what we're meant to aspire to. Is not to see people as other than what we are. Here, there's a growth of consciousness. There's a consciousness that's expanding. There's expansion. This is the ascension for all of us. One family of Christ. Christ's nature. Pure consciousness. This is the wisdom, this is the true knowledge of your knowing. This is now when you realize this truth, that the mind is reconnaissance but all experience is knowing. When you realize this truth, as knowing, you begin to abide. And you just see that there are these three truths. That everything, the experience of anything, at the root of it is knowing. Everything, nothing is separate from it. And the knowing, when it goes within, is God. And when the knowing is connecting with you, when I'm not living by the reconnaissant mind, from my pictures of you, when I'm living as knowing, merging with you, then I see you not as other than what I am. That's the third truth. But these truths are in knowing only.